Okay, I think we're set. We've got some more people showing up too.
Okay.
So hit it,
All
guys.
right. All right. Hi, good evening, everyone. So nice to see folks and to be with you tonight. Thank you so much, Gary and Zan, for the opportunity. So as Zan said, I'm Maria Santelli. I'm the current executive director of the Center on Conscience and War, but there's been several directors before me because our organization is 81, will be 81 years old this year. We were founded in 1940 by what we know as the traditional peace churches, Quakers, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren, but also the Methodist Office of World Peace. There was a Methodist Office of World Peace at that time. And it was clear by 1940. These churches were also meeting in the 1930s, watching what was going on in Europe. And when it was clear by 1940 that the US was going to enter World War II, those groups sprang into action. And they were motivated to protect conscientious objectors, mainly because of what had happened in World War I. There was not legally binding, robust protection for conscientious objectors in World War I. We talk a lot about this on our website. There's also a wonderful play that you can watch on YouTube called This Evil Thing, which portrays the struggles of conscientious objectors in World War I. But they were in many countries in World War I, including the United States, brutalized. Many people were tortured to death, died as a result of their conditions. Conscientious objectors were kept at Alcatraz and Leavenworth. When a man was a conscientious objector in World War I, if they were drafted, they were in the military. And so if they refused, they were tried by military tribunals and they were imprisoned in military prisons. So, and you also had to be in World War I to even get non-combat military status. There was no civilian alternative service. You had to get non-combat military service. And even to get that, you had to be a member of a peace church who was a peace church at the time the draft law was signed in 1917. So you had to have a statement of peace on your books at the time the draft law of 1917 was signed. So that was a really high bar for folks to meet. So our founders, when they worked with the federal government in drafting the 1940 draft law, they made three really important changes. You did not have to be a member of a peace church to be a conscientious objector. So you still had to be religious at that time. The law has since opened up, but you still had to be religious at that time. But they also made sure that people could perform alternative civilian service. So if a man was drafted and applied for conscientious objection status, they could perform alternative civilian service. They did not have to perform non-combat military service. And for those men who refused, they were then after the 1940 draft law, tried by civilian courts and not military courts. So those were the three major victories that our organization, our founders, had won. And Department of Defense policy still bases the Department of Defense still bases their conscientious objection policy on the draft law of 1940. Since 1940, of course, the law has opened up, and that you can now be a secular objector as well. I think I actually said too much, Bill. I think I spoke into what you were gonna talk about, but I felt like that was important by way of introducing the organization to really nod to the struggle that those folks had. But I won't say any more about the law. So that's who we are, and I'm going to, after Bill and Adam introduce themselves, I'm going to initiate a little interactive exercise for us. So I'm going to ask that you get a pen and paper ready. You have some time, no rush, but get a pen and paper ready when you're able to. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Bill and Adam just to introduce yourselves.
You want to go first, Adam? No, well, I will. You're whatever. Okay, since you're on mute. Okay. Yeah, well, I'm Bill. I've been on the staff of the Center on Conscience and War since 2000. I've been involved with the board or the council since the 70s. This has been my life ever since I was part of my history, I was planning to be a minister, and the war in Vietnam changed that, I think, for me and my life of being an advocate, being a draft counselor, being an advocate for other people and things like that. I just knew this was the way for me to go. I worked at CCCO for a while. I mean, Gary had asked me if we used to be CCCO. We get that question a lot. That's another organization that would support conscientious objectors. CCCO actually grew out of us in the 40s, and they unfortunately ceased to exist about a decade ago. But back in the day, they were an awesome group. But we always worked cooperatively. I'm not sure what else to say. I mean, I think I mentioned before my draft board turned me down, and I really did have to. But I went through that experience. I went through the draft board hearings. I had to face the possibility. They actually asked me, what do you do if we turn you down and we draft you? And I remember, at the time thinking, well, and I actually said this. I said, well, I know I can't go in the Army, so. And at that point, I felt I did not feel that leaving the country was a good the right thing to do. I don't feel that way now, but that's how I felt at the time. And I said, so I guess that means I'll go to jail. And I was kind of scared thinking about that prospect, but it's like you gotta be true to what you know to be true, but I went through that draft board experience. I sat there with 5 old men, all of them World War II veterans, asking me question after question about, really trying to somehow trip me up or somehow, prove I didn't really believe what I said I believed. I mean, I'm Presbyterian. I based my objection on my Christian faith. They would pull up all these quotes out of the Bible that they thought, would justify war. So I went through it and I know what it was like. And that's one of the reasons why I think this work is so important. And it's important that we be here to stand with folks who are going through it now. So that's enough for me at the moment.
All right, I'm Adam. I'm a high school senior. My record is almost as impressive as Bill's. I've been with the organization for 3 months. And I don't know, I was, automatically registered when I signed up for a driver's license. That got me pretty angry. And yeah, I mean, I'm still learning a lot, but that's, I guess, my story is I was one of the new wave of kind of automatic registrations, which I'll talk about later at a little more length.
Thank you, guys. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here in a moment because we're going to go through a little bit of an exercise. We're going to do 2 exercises, interactive exercises together, and then kind of hopefully, have those spark some discussion. So, Bill's going to talk about in a little bit what the law says a conscientious objector is. But of course, we're all going to, what we're going to invite people to do is kind of give your feelings on what a conscientious objector is and where do you stand? Where do you stand with respect to your participation in military service and war? What about conscious or subconscious, unconscious support for war and militarism? Where are you on those things? What beliefs maybe do you hold in some places in your heart that you knew were there, you didn't know were there, that may be contributing to a culture of militarism or a culture of peace? So yeah, we have this pretty cool exercise we're going to share with you. So I'm going to share my screen. I think I can, right? Yes, I can. Oh, I can't. It says host disabled screen sharing.
Yeah, I think I need to
That's
enable it.
okay.
I'm not quite sure to do that. I did it once.
Okay, if you can't, that's okay. I mean, I can still read the questions. It's nice to see them and just give people a chance to sort of mull it over if you can't. But if you
There we
can.
go.
Yeah.
Share screen. Is that open it up? Right?
Yep, I can do it. Awesome.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, we're over there now. All right. So there's just our little intro slide. Yeah, and what we see this as a way to uncover, challenge, and transform militarism within ourselves and our communities. So this exercise is called Where Do I Stand? And we're going to ask a series of questions, and I and Bill and Adam will, take turns. So I'm not the one speaking all of the time through this. But I think there's 13 questions, and we're going to ask you, to determine on this scale, do I strongly disagree with that? Do I disagree with that? Agree, strongly agree, or have no opinion? Anybody have any thoughts or questions before we begin? All right, here we go. So the first question, I would never intentionally kill another person under any circumstances. I'm just going to pause and give you a few seconds to think about this and think about what are some of the dimensions to these questions that strike you and maybe tug at your heart or your conscience in some way.
Sometimes killing another person can be an act of love.
I can name a just war.
The US would be justified in engaging in wars for resources like water, arable land, oil, etc.
War may be necessary to protect our borders from climate refugees.
Sometimes God uses the military to carry out his will on earth, or if you're not religious, sometimes the military is used for purely beneficial purposes.
The US should not have a military at all.
Every adult US citizen should be required to do military service.
I feel some responsibility for the killing done by the US military.
In warfare authorized by legitimate authority, one person is not the killer, but the group is.
I belong to the group that kills.
I can belong to the group that kills and still be a good person.
I can support others to train to kill and still be a good person. So, do folks have any thoughts about that exercise? How did it strike you? Anything surprising? And I invite people to please jump in. You can raise your hand if you want to choose that function, or you can just speak. I think we're a small enough group that we can be informal in that way.
Yes, but remember to unmute yourself if you're, if you're muted.
I appreciate the challenge in putting the exercise together, and that the tone at the very beginning may not reflect the complexity or richness of the topics as we go along. And I don't mean to be hypercritical, But one of the things that I did learn in my experience with the draft board and with others who would challenge my thoughts and positions was that there was a certain category of communication that I called draft board questions. And it was a series of black and white. What would you do if? And one of the lessons that I learned in telling my story and sometimes defending the story is to be gentle with others who may disagree.
I see Will Bickerman has his hand up. Did you want to unmute, Will?
Yeah, sure. I think there were a few things that I had much more strongly agree, strongly disagree things at the beginning than I did later on. I think as we continued through, there were a lot more questions lower down that made me think more about the first ones. Like one of the later questions stated, is it a group that is the group responsible for the killing? And I think that made me think a lot about the first question. If a group is the one responsible for the killing, if it's America that's doing the killing, then is any one person in the military necessarily responsible for a specific death of someone? And how do we weigh when a person is responsible for that death and when they aren't? And then additionally, how do we define that group? Is the group the military is the one killing? Is America as a whole what's killing people? Because I'm an American and I strongly stand by that. So if we define it as American, am I part of the group that's killing? I still think of myself as a good person. I don't want to be part of that group that's killing. But if we're defining America as the group that's killing, I think there's a lot of definitions that need to be placed to sort of understand and to understand the scope of this conversation.
Sure.
Mhm.
There's a couple of guys here, Faith Hudson.
Hi, yeah, my name's not Faith. I'm Aaron.
I'm Faith.
But that's Faith.
Okay.
But no, the questions were really interesting. I thought I sort of agree with what Will was saying. It sort of made me the questions that made me that were inclusive of me and made me reflect on my role in like military violence were really hard for me to answer. And I found myself like trying to like I personally don't want to be part of the group that is killing, but at the same time, you could sort of have to analyze your role and like I tried to be not part of the group that's killing, but nonetheless, like I very well may still be. So that was my take on it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Oh, all I wanted to say was that when you said before about how these questions might make us realize our subconscious biases or like beliefs and attitudes towards war, I didn't really know what you meant until after the fact, where I think the question was just how you could justify killing. And I was thinking like a situation maybe of where a family member was in danger or something like that. But I just reflecting on that, seeing how far that reasoning can go. I've personally heard people in the Army saying, would you rather it be their parents or yours? And just how much of a slippery slope that can be. And it just like a lot of self-reflecting on, I don't know, just rethinking my attitudes towards the military and towards what I thought I believed.
Marie, I forgot to mention also that if folks want to stay in touch with Plowshare, they can put their names and emails or mailing addresses too in the chat, and I'll get you on our mailing list, our email list. We don't send out much, so you won't be swamped with emails if you leave your email there. But we do have events. We've got Pastors for Peace coming in June. So just put your names and emails and possibly your mailing addresses too if you want our newsletter and chat, and I'll get you on our contact list.
Sue.
Looks like Sue.
One of the things that struck me many years ago when I was doing some draft and military counseling during the Vietnam War is that we always put people in this situation when they're about 18 years old. And they haven't had a lot of chance to think about these things, and they haven't had the reality of what the experience is. For me, I called myself a pacifist. but I didn't really know that I was a pacifist until I started working in war zones and realized that I had no interest in picking up a weapon. And therefore, I felt easier about encouraging other people to lay down their weapons because I knew what we were asking. I think for me that there's a big difference between whether I kill somebody or whether the military does, in the same sense that it's different with capital punishment. It's the state in cold blood doing something that any of us might have in us to do if someone we cared about were threatened or if we ourselves were threatened. So for me, that became a useful distinction. But it's just a terrible place to put young people in. And I actually believe that if there's going to be registration and a draft, it ought to include, personally, I think it should include young women, but that just means twice as many young people being put in this awkward position. So it's good to be getting all of us thinking about these things maybe before we face the barrel of the gun.
And Sue's too modest to mention it, but she's been a peacemaker working in peacemaking all over the world, like Northern Ireland and Africa and all over the world.
Nice, beautiful. Maybe another comment or two, and then, yeah.
Mike.
Just a brief mention of my perspective. When I was 18, I went to West Point and I graduated and spent 5 years in the Army. And I gradually became more and more disillusioned with the military and became a Quaker almost immediately after I got out of the Army. And so I've been a Quaker a long time now, 45 years. And I want to say the latter questions about whether you would be a good person were really interesting. They're good questions. But in a way, I think they're invalid questions. I think I would add, what if we said, just as a ground rule, that almost everybody's a good person? So let's begin with that assumption. There might be a few exceptions, very small number, or the opposite, nobody's a good person. So what do we do with that? I think in a way it's not helpful to try to determine whether I'm a good person or not in this list of questions. I also want to build on what Sue said. I think one reason that we draft 18-year-olds is because we can.
Yeah.
They don't know much. When I was 18, I was a dumbass. And we don't draft 36-year-olds because they won't go. 36-year-olds, I would guess, most of them would say, no, thank you.
I was reminded, like folks have said, it was tough. I was like 18, 19, struggling with all this stuff. And I came from small town, my people were farmers and factory workers, and I was Irish Catholic, and, I turned against the Vietnam War gradually and realized it was wrong politically and morally, religiously. I didn't believe, I had a lot of friends who were total pacifists. They would die rather than kill anybody. And you get a lot of that from I knew a lot of people in the War Resisters League who just, I remember reading one thing of somebody who said, they were my brothers and sisters, and how could I kill them? Anybody. I never got there. My family has a long military history, not officers and stuff, but we fought, starting in the Civil War, going back that far. There was a relative of mine who was in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War. So, there was that military tradition, and then I come out of this, my parents just didn't know what to make of this at all. But, I was like, Bill, I was willing to go to prison. And, it was very anticlimactic, actually, because, I got a letter from my priest and one from my mom, and I did all the reading and filled out all the forms. And I was going to school at Northern Illinois University, and I went down to the post office box or the mailbox in the dormitory one day and opened up the letter, and there was a card from my draft board. I didn't even have to meet with them. I mean, I never heard of anybody who didn't even have to meet with their draft board. They just sent it to me. But it was a transforming experience because I'd never even had a speeding ticket or anything like that. You know, I was just like a good boy. To be willing to go to federal prison for 5 years was, you know, it really made you look out at the world and really kind of examine your life. But it's tough if you're 18 or 19-year-old, because what do you know? You know, like Matt said, what do you know? Yeah.
That kind of was what hit me too. The why people are targeting young people like that. Because it seems like, you know, all these questions, if anything, opened my eyes to how little I have reflected at times. And, you know, kind of opened my eyes to other people's perspectives and, you know, ask questions that I hadn't even thought to ask. And, you know, young people, or everyone, I guess, they want answers. And it's hard because the military is like, okay, yeah, we have the answers. We'll tell you what you need to do. It's very simple and easy. You kind of just, you're told that that's the right thing to do and you do it. And people aren't thinking about it. And those people aren't always asking it's hard because people aren't going in and they aren't reflecting. They aren't asking the right questions.
I see Skylar and Amma have their hands up. Maybe Skylar, do you want to go ahead?
I was also thinking about kind of like being like how, you know, young people are targeted. I think today a lot, like I see advertisements that are from the US military that are like, you know, trying to get people to join the army, and they're very targeted. Like, I know, like one of them is like they make it seem like a cool thing to do. And like, it's clearly like, it's kind of, it's like trying to take advantage of young people, you know, even if, and it's, you know, it's kind of just like gross to see it because, you know, a lot of like, I don't want to, I guess, patronize because, you know, I'm 18 myself and I'd like to think that I am, you know, I can think, I can think about something and I'm like, you know, I can critically examine a situation. And, sorry, one second. And so, yeah, like I can critically examine a situation, but also there's a lot of people, you know, who may not be able to, and even I don't know what I don't know. It's weird phrasing. And so I think things like that, like you're really exploiting young people who may not know what they're getting into or may not kind of see any other options for themselves, which kind of just makes it like, yeah, gross, as I say.
Amma, I'm not sure it's Amma or Amma, did you want to share something?
Yeah, it's Amma. Well, Skylar just took the words out of my mouth, literally. I was gonna say that me being almost 18 now, though I may like to think that I'm able to like analyze situations and like make good decisions for myself, you know, I probably am not able to fully, definitely am not able to fully. And just thinking about, and yeah, what Matthew said too, how it's really taking advantage of young people and how independent and smart they might think they are. And also, I was just, sorry, I joined a bit late and I was wondering if it wasn't too much trouble, if I could get like a reintroduction on what the center of consciousness is. Is that at the center of conscience? Hopefully I said that right.
Center on conscience.
Got it, thank you.
Well, maybe it's a good time to, you know, transition into our next segment. And Bill, you want to fold that in?
Sure.
Well, can I interpose for a second before I forget? Plowshare, you know, if folks are interested, Plowshare had a Truth and Recruitment Committee that was active in the aughts and sort of fell apart. What Truth and Recruitment is, what we were doing, we were going into the local schools in Roanoke and putting information about alternatives to military service and what the draft recruiters may be saying, the selective service recruiter, the military recruiters may be saying that's not quite true and that sort of thing. We were getting that into the guidance counselor centers in the Roanoke city. The committee sort of fell apart, but I've always wanted to revive it. So if anybody, you know, we don't have to talk about it now, but if anybody wants to revive that committee, you know, Plowshare's got a budget and lots of people, and we just need people to sort of be willing to do that sort of thing. So, I'll put my email actually in the chat, and if anybody's interested in reviving that Truth and Recruitment Committee, let me know, and I'll definitely be willing to meet with you. Sorry, go ahead. And you guys actually did a Truth and Recruitment workshop with us, teaching us how to do it about 10 years ago. So you guys are available as a resource. So, sorry,
Yes.
go ahead.
No, that's okay. No. And Alma, I will answer your question in a minute or two. Okay. But there have been conscientious objectors as long as there has been war. And there's stuff related to it going back to some of the ancient Greek literature. There are some of the ancient rabbis actually thought that the first recorded provision for conscientious objection was in Deuteronomy in the Bible. I don't have the verse in front of me right now, but something about exempting people who referring to like of tender heart or people who are afraid, but what they interpreted that to mean is they were afraid they would sin by killing people. I mean, it was not referring to people who being afraid for themselves. So this has been a part of life forever. The military itself has done studies to find out, how common these kind of feelings are. There have been conscientious objectors in the United States since before the paleface folks arrived. Some of the native tribes were pacifist. And going to colonial times, there were folks who came to the US to escape conscription and wars in the military, various religious groups. I mean, we know of Quakers and Mennonites and Brethren, but there are others that you may not have heard of, like Hutterites and Mullicans
Mullicans?
Pardon?
Mullicans.
Yeah, the Mullicans.
Dunkers, Mullicans, and Dunkers.
Yeah. So there's a wide range of groups that have come here for that purpose. It's part of what, at least in theory, is a part of our Constitution, because there's a guarantee of freedom of religion and belief and that kind of thing. Going back to, and some of the colonies actually had provision for conscientious objectors written into their Constitution and their laws. And it was actually George Washington who had to deal with some conscientious objectors who had gotten conscripted into the Revolutionary Army. They had their muskets tied to their backs because they refused to carry them. They were Quakers. And it was George Washington who, when he found out about this, had these men sent home. So this has been a part of this country, as long as this country has been around. In our current law, okay, and so conscientious objectors object in all sorts of ways. Okay, everything from not registering for the draft to not paying war taxes, to actually, registering for the draft and then applying for conscientious objector status. Actually, during World War II, there was a big debate because, okay, Maria mentioned that, when we were founded in 1940 by some of these church groups, they had worked hard to get better protection in the law and a non-military alternative. And that was very important at the time. But there was a big debate at that point in the CO community, because they felt, well, if you register for the draft, and even if you're doing alternative service at the order of the selective service system, you're still cooperating with the war effort. So there were debates between these conscientious objectors going back that far. So the Center on Conscience and War was founded back in 1940 to support conscientious objectors, which is a major part of what we've been doing ever since. And during World War II, with the alternative service, we were very involved in helping people get placed into alternative service jobs. Throughout the Vietnam period, we were resourcing a whole network of draft counselors that, along with CCCO, which some of you know the group CCCO, and we've continued to do that ever since with folks. It was in the post-draft period. Then, I mean, we have a military policy that says if you become a conscientious objector once you're in the military, that's grounds for discharge, and it's normally an honorable discharge. And that policy is based on the draft law from back in 1940. Man, there's so much I could say about this.
Well, what I didn't say was how the law opened up. Do you want to talk about just like Seeger and Welsh?
Yeah, we're going to get, okay, yeah. The actual definition in the law, in US law, because, yeah, so like I say, the conscientious objectors themselves object to war and take all sorts of positions, some of which are legal under our system, some of which are not. But what US law defines as a conscientious objector is someone who is conscientiously opposed to their participation in war because of their ethical moral, or religious beliefs. Okay, and that's the legal definition. So it's their personal opposition. So their application for a conscientious objector is not some treatise about war and how bad it is, but it's a statement of their values and what their values cause them to do or not do. Now, the law that passed in 1940 actually said it had to be based on religious training and belief. And back in the 50s, they added a question that said, do you believe in a supreme being? And this is, I think, also the time when they put that under God and the Pledge of Allegiance and that kind of thing was going on. And Dan Seeger, who is now a respected Quaker, but back at the time he had been raised Catholic, but had questions about his faith. And when it came to this question about supreme being, he wrote a paper on the knowability or unknowability of God. Okay, that was his answer to that question. And he qualified as a conscientious objector in every respect, except that he didn't say yes to that question. And so he was turned down, and his case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled that he qualified as a conscientious objector. So that struck down the supreme being clause. And so in the late 60s, when I was dealing with it, and some of the others who have spoken, probably at that point, I had to deal with the question, explain how your beliefs are religious. And I remember, looking up religion in the dictionary and explaining how Christianity fit that definition. That was part of what the thing you had to go through. But along came Welsh, who basically said, I'm not religious. But he qualified, and the same thing happened as what happened with Dan Seeger. That when except for that he qualified, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that he qualified, and they basically expanded the decision that they had laid out with the Seeger decision, and they said basically that they knew they were like opening the barn door, and they're thinking, well, it's going to walk through, so they used words like beliefs that are that have a parallel place in their, in the person's life as belief in God has in a non-religious person's life. And they talk about beliefs that are so strong that they compel in you a duty to do certain things and certain activities. So because of those court cases, the law has now been expanded to include, ethical, moral, and religious beliefs, even though the law still says religious, the draft law still says religious. Military regulations have now changed to reflect, ethical, moral, and religious. But what's really interesting is a couple of folks have mentioned 1O and 1AO. Those are the two kinds of conscientious objectors that are recognized under law. A 1O conscientious objector is somebody who objects to their participation in the military in any way, shape, or form. And so folks who get recognized for that status, instead of being drafted into the military, they would be drafted to do alternative service, not civilian service, some kind of work that benefits the society. The regulations say that work in agriculture, healthcare, environmental protection, social and community services, and something else, I'm forgetting it right now. But anyway, those are the kinds of jobs that those conscientious objectors would be doing if they got drafted. The other kind of conscientious objector is 1AO, and that's somebody whose primary objection is actually to killing or to participating in combat. But they would be okay with being in the military as long as they didn't actually have to kill. And so those folks would be drafted into the military as non-combatants. And I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge or heard about it, but that is actually a story of one of those conscientious objectors who did some pretty heroic stuff without carrying a weapon and killing people. And so there are people who have that position too. What's interesting is the military uses those names, 1O and 1AO are used in the military, and those categories actually come from the draft law. And nobody in the military knows that's why they use those categories, but they do. So that's basically
in the chat. Jeffrey Klinger has identified himself as 1AO.
1AO, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, yes. I've had some friends who are 1AO, and yeah, and have done some pretty amazing things. So So yeah, so that's what the law says qualifies as a conscientious objector. And if you can't just say, hey, I don't believe in war, and then have them give you one of these alternatives. There's a process you have to go through where you have to submit a written application. And as you've heard from some of our conversation already, you go before a draft board and they ask you questions and they make some kind of decision as to whether they're going to approve you or not. And so, well, first of all, are there any questions about conscientious objection in general? I mean, I could talk about this for hours. So
You didn't say how the military uses 1AO and 1O, I don't think. So I just want bring us up to the present day who conscientious objectors are now. You mentioned,
well,
you know,
yeah.
1AO.
Sure. Well, so yeah, people in the military become conscientious objectors and they either apply for discharge or they apply to be classified as a non-combatant. And legally, a non-combatant simply means that you would never be required to carry a weapon or use a weapon or be trained in the use of weapons. But otherwise, you're a full regular member of the military. You could actually be out on the front lines. The most common assignment historically has been to the medical corps, where many of them were on the front lines, providing, you know, first aid and things like that to people who got injured on the battlefield. So people who become conscientious objectors once they're in the military either apply to become a non-combatant or apply for discharge. It's a lengthy process they had to go through. It's even more difficult than the draft process, and it takes usually about a year, and it's a year that they're still in the military, still required to follow orders, and so it can run into a lot of problems. But that's a big part of what we're doing these days, is helping folks in that position and standing with them as they're going through that position. And actually, and I know this is a little off topic, but you know, something someone said earlier in telling their story or reacting to the exercise we did reminded me of a conscientious objector I'm working with right now. Her brother was murdered about the time she entered the military. And it's been dealing with that whole process. And you know, I'm dealing with that herself, but also reflecting on what that means in terms of her values and the world she wants to be a part of and live in. That has really shaped her into the conscientious objector that she is.
Bill, a couple of our young people have had to leave for dinner and stuff. Perhaps you can mention before other folks have to leave that there is no selective service now, but there is a way to indicate to selective service that you want to be a CL.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Maria, were you going to say
something? I think Adam's going to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
So should we move to Adam now before the next exercise, or?
Yeah. Are you ready,
we're
Adam?
Going into the belief exercise first, right?
Yeah, we were gonna. I mean, are people needing
we can
to leave?
We've lost, I think, 3 of the young people, so I just wanted to get that in before.
We don't want to lose
more
people.
had to leave.
Sure. Why don't we go to my slideshow then? I'll try to share my screen.
Sure.
Mhm.
All right. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so I mean, you've already heard what selective service is. It's this system that we have in the event of a military draft. Right now, it only applies to 18 through 25-year-olds who were assigned male at birth. There's no regard for anything but biological sex in that. But there are, as someone mentioned earlier, considerations being made to expand this to all youth. Now, historically, in the American Revolution, we had the separate states drafting their own people. In the Civil War, we had some of the first national drafts. And as someone, I think Maria mentioned, selective service was started in World War I. And it registers every person who could be eligible so that if the president and Congress vote to authorize the use of a draft, they will have a list of everybody's names. Now, you'll notice that the president does not and Congress do not have to declare war. You could theoretically be drafted tomorrow without the declaration of a war if Congress and the president authorized this draft. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the 3 basic moral questions that you're going to be asked if you choose to register as a US recognized selective or conscientious objector. But as Bill mentioned, the big basic criteria is opposition to participating in any war. You can't say, I oppose this war for this reason, but would fight in this war because I believe that was a just war. Bill also mentioned that if you don't get classified as a CO, you could be put in a combat role, or you could put in a non-combat role, or you could be put in alternative service, finally. And recently there's been a bit of progress in that they used to try to go out of their way to inconvenience you with this alternative service. Now, if you've got a qualifying job, one of those sectors, you will probably be allowed to stay in it. And I do want to talk for a second about the consequences of not registering. It's a felony. Someone's mentioned, I think, that you can get up to 5 years in prison for it, and this big scary fine. You will be permanently ineligible to work in the federal government and for federal funds. And there are state-by-state consequences that largely mirror these federal consequences. You might be ineligible to work in state governments or for state scholarships. All right. 1 second. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about.
Don't forget driver's licenses. Or is that later?
That's right here. Sorry. So if you are preparing to object to the draft or resist selective service entirely, the biggest thing you should know is driver's licenses. There are plenty of states, I would say probably, I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but there are plenty of states like DC where if you go into the DMV and register for a driver's license, they will automatically send your information to selective service. In DC, for example, you can, if you know, request a waiver. Some states will give you a box to check to opt out. Some states will give you no option. And so this is one of the biggest things you have to know, but there are other ways that you can be automatically registered as well. And so we recommend that you go to the Center for Conscience website and look at our rundown of state-by-state laws. Second, if you want to be recognized by the American government as a conscientious objector, you will have to present your case before a draft board. And one of the things they're going to want to see is that you did not form your beliefs when you got the draft notice, that you had these beliefs for some amount of time beforehand, and that they are real and genuine. So what we call a conscientious objector file, a file of all the evidence you can think of that would help prove your case. Essays you've written, your diary even, certainly your attendance at this would be a mark in your favor. But just any kind of documentation that can prove that your beliefs are yours, that are sincerely held, and that they have a long history are useful. And one of the next, even more useful kinds of evidence is evidence of these beliefs affecting your personal life, affecting your day-to-day conduct. So if you want more help starting a CO file, it's definitely the kind of thing we can help you with. But that's something you should consider if you want to conscientiously object to the draft once drafted. If you want to resist selective service entirely, you will, as I said, you'll have to deal with those consequences, and you do want to see the website to avoid automatic registration. Now, you might have noticed that we're not feeling so warm about selective service. There's certainly reform efforts, to expand it to all genders. Some people call that reform. And there are other reform efforts like getting rid of this automatic registration, getting rid of, right now there are some states where you can be registered at 16 or 17 if you go into the DMV. So that's something we're trying to get rid of. But what we're really excited about is this Selective Service Repeal Act that's been introduced in the House and in the Senate. And this is one of the most concrete ways that you can immediately make a difference is contact your congressperson and say, I support the Selective Service Repeal Act, please vote for it. Yeah, and I don't know if Bill and Maria want to talk about more ways you can help advocate against selective service, but that Selective Service Repeal Act is something we're excited about. Anything?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yeah, I'm gonna put in the chat the bill numbers. And you definitely contact your congressperson. This bill has been introduced before last year and in other incarnations in previous years, many times by Representative Peter DeFazio from Oregon. And he's introduced it again along with Senator Wyden, also from Oregon, and then other bipartisan support in both houses. So they're looking for bipartisan, they're looking for bipartisan co-sponsors from other congressional districts. So, we're trying to spread the word about this. And if you could spread the word about this, that would be great, because this could be circumvented in a couple of ways: through the Supreme Court or through Congress in the form of the National Defense Authorization Act. So this is where this all got started several years ago, was through the National Defense Authorization Act, the idea of drafting women, including women in the draft. It's also, you know, there's also a case in front of the Supreme Court to consider the male-only draft unconstitutional as sex discrimination. So the Supreme Court is deciding if they're going to take that case right now. If they do take that case, they can decide it is unconstitutional and the law would be gone. Or they can do some other sort of legal trickery and end up, you know, expanding the draft to everyone. But Congress can act before that through the must pass National Defense Authorization Act by putting an amendment in there to expand the draft to women. So that's what we're concerned about happening. So we want the repeal of selective service to be on the table, part of the discussion as an alternative. So I'm going to get you those bill numbers right now and put that in the chat. And then the other issue that I wanted to touch on also is how to make your claim. As Adam mentioned, you're not going to be officially declared a conscientious objector right now in the absence of a draft. But there are some things that you can do, as Adam mentioned, starting your CO file. But we also recommend to people that you register, if you're going to choose to register, if you're not going to resist registration and you're going to choose to register, that you actually register on paper, that you go to the post office and you register on paper. And when you do that, you write inside the margins, in any white space that's inside the margins, you write, I am a conscientious objector. And then you would mail that in to Selective Service. Selective Service will likely then answer you and say, hey, we're not registering people as conscientious objectors right now. But there's your evidence. You make a copy of your card that you wrote on, and you make a copy of that letter that came from Selective Service. That becomes part of your file to prove that you are a conscientious objector at this time and that you're establishing that history. As of now, they're still keeping, right, Bill? They're still keeping the originals of your card on microfiche.
Yeah, on microfilm, yeah.
Or microfilm. I don't know the difference. So I'm imagining at some point they're going to digitize this, but they're not yet. Not unless we repeal it first. So that's the idea. Repeal the Selective Service Act. By doing so, this will also get rid of those penalties. So as Adam mentioned, the penalties are pretty severe and lifelong. So if a young man at this time refuses to register, they're banned from student financial aid for life. They're banned from federal jobs for life. So the Selective Service Repeal Act would overturn those penalties for everyone, right? If a law is worth enforcing, then enforce it. It's a felony offense and $250,000 fine, 5 years in jail, yet no one has been prosecuted since the 1980s. So they've just done this underhanded, extrajudicial, unconstitutional, if you ask me, no due process, right? Punishment of people. So we want to see that gotten rid of. Those of you who've used the FAFSA, the financial aid form, if you're a person who's required to register, you're also going to be denied, you're either going to be automatically registered through the FAFSA or denied federal aid. But Congress has realized that this puts people at a disadvantage. And starting in the year, no later than 2023, young people applying for financial aid for college will not be required to register with Selective Service in order to get student financial aid. But the other penalties, driver's licenses, state higher education entry to schools or state financial aid, federal jobs, those things would still be in place unless some action was taken. There's
Adam,
the bill numbers.
Were you going to say more, Adam?
Yeah, I wanted to say what Maria said about the the kind of the threat of prosecution, how that hasn't been invoked recently. But I also I think that's all. I think we can go into the beliefs exercise now if we're ready, unless you have something to add, Bill.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, we've been talking about this process that conscientious objectors have to go through, and it begins with a written application. And conscientious objectors are asked to answer with the draft right now. Their current plans is there's going to be 3 questions that conscientious objectors are expected to answer. And we want to take a few minutes now and have each of you answer these questions. So that's another thing that we want your pencil and paper for. But so the first of these questions is basically, what do you believe? And they want to know, like, what are the values you hold? The religious beliefs, or, if it's more ethical or whatever, then, talk about your ethical framework. How do you decide whether something is right or wrong? You can see here on the screen, there's some examples of the kinds of things that people have talked about, like God, love, truth, and so you talk about what those things are, what they mean to you in your life, and then how they lead you to say, I can't be a part of war. So just take a couple of minutes to jot down your answer to that question.
Yeah, I think we're gonna give you 3 minutes per question. So we'll come back in 3 minutes.
And do they lead you to oppose war? I mean, we're assuming folks here are conscientious objectors, but do they lead you
Right.
to oppose war?
But if you're not a conscientious objector, still write this up and talk about what your values are and how they influence your position on war.
I think I think this exercise is so important for anyone to engage in. But picture, as we were talking about, 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds who are already in the military, maybe thought their whole lives they were going to join the military. And now they're asked to, reflect on their beliefs, not just reflect on their beliefs, but as we go into the next question, prove their beliefs. Prove that these beliefs are real for them. I feel like 3 minutes is a long time. Are people ready to move to the next question? Any objections to move to the next question? It's been about 2 minutes, I think. Hearing no objections. The next question is, how did your beliefs develop? Thinking about the values that you just wrote down, how did you develop those values in your life? What was the process by which you developed those? Were you raised with those beliefs? Did you veer away from beliefs or values that you were raised with and adopt some of your own? What were some of your experiences that shaped those values? And obviously, if you have experienced war or training for war or military service of some kind, how did that influence your beliefs and how they developed? And the final question?
Sure. So this is how your beliefs affect your daily life. And so as we've talked about a little before, and anything you've written, anything you've said should definitely go in this answer. But you don't have to, be a writer or a speaker. This can also be how you live your beliefs, how you live your beliefs, and how you plan to continue doing so, I guess I would say. So as I mentioned, this can kind of take many forms. You can talk about the media you consume and don't consume, the things you do outside of your school or work, what you would do in your school or work, and how these show your both the development of your beliefs and your current beliefs about war and violence.
So, sit with those questions a little bit. If you have more to add as we continue talking, we can do that, but we'd like to return to those, a little bit later, and kind of just some reactions about both of those exercises, the where do I stand exercise and now the beliefs exercise, and see if anything, changed for you, or if anything, was stirred up for you. We were talking about making a CO file and resisting selective service, and just want to make sure we've addressed any questions or things people wanted to learn about that before we move on to a couple of other bits. Just in case anyone's going to leave. Again, any young folks have any questions about their own personal CO file or how selective service law affects them currently?
Well, I guess as a 18-year-old who's already registered in the draft, how would you go about like kind of bolstering almost that resume of proving that you do hold these certain kinds of beliefs? I mean, it seems crazy that you'd have to, I don't know, prove something like this to someone, but if that's what it takes, like what can you do if you can't like write in the margins
Anymore, because it's already done.
Right.
Yeah. Bill?
A couple things. Okay, well, first of all, I mean, how recently did you register?
Gosh, like half a year ago, 6 months ago, something like that.
Did you get a registration acknowledgement in the mail, some computer printout that they usually send to verify that you registered?
Honestly, I don't know, but it sounds like if I haven't, it might not be too late.
Well, okay, you should have got one, okay, and
I probably did, to be honest. Yeah.
And I mean, so one thing is the registration acknowledgement. The instructions actually say, if any, it also includes a change of information form, and so it says, if anything is incorrect or if anything has changed, fill out this form and let us know. So if you have that form, you could get that form and write on there that I'm a conscientious objector and I need you to reflect that in your files. But if you can't find that form, that's okay. You can just write a letter, okay? Write a letter to Selective Service, identify yourself, give your name, and well, you should have gotten a Selective Service number when you registered. That's what's on that registration acknowledgement. But
you can also check your registration online.
Right, yeah, you can go to online to the Selective Service website, which is sss.gov, sss.gov. So you can go to that website, put in your name and your social security number, and it will tell you what your Selective Service number is. So then you can include that and your name and sign this paper that you send into them. And of course, keep a copy of it. And it would be best if you sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, because this means well, first of all, you get a receipt the day you mail it, but more importantly, there is a postcard that gets attached to it, to the envelope. And when it's being delivered, somebody from Selective Service has to sign it. The letter carrier then tears that off and mails it back to you. So if you have that signed receipt, that will stand up in court if necessary as proof that they received something from you on that date. And if they don't have what you sent them, it's presumed to be what you say it is. So take your receipts, staple them to your copy, and you've got proof that you tried to get on record, okay? This is still not the same as, as actually applying for CO status. This is something we need to emphasize here. Under the current regulations, in order to get conscientious objector status or any deferment or exemption, you have to apply for it during the narrow window of time that they give you around the time that they're going to draft you. And when I say narrow window of time, it will probably be around 10 days. So during that period is when you actually have to, respond to Selective Service and tell them that you're a conscientious objector. What we're talking about here is helping to build a file that shows that you're serious about this, you're sincere about it, and you've been doing what you can, ever since you started with Selective Service to try to get them to take it seriously.
That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
May I ask a question there?
Yeah.
Am I correct? I've thought for decades that it's helpful to become a member of organizations like the Fellowship of Reconciliation and other organizations to show proof of involvement.
Yes. Or the Plowshares Peace Center, I mean.
Standing on the corner, pictures of you standing on the corner. Those could all be part of your file. We keep files for people. You can keep your file on record with your faith community if that applies to you. We have a file drawer of people. We always tell people that we will keep their file until they're 26, but I've been here for 10 years and we've never gotten rid of one. So we'll keep it as long as we have that file.
In addition to the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a person could subscribe to the Catholic Worker newspaper. There's numerous ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, War Resisters League.
Yeah, I was about to say the War Resisters League, and also many. I mean, obviously, if you're Quaker or some other historic Peace Church member, that helps. But even if you're from some other denomination like Presbyterian or Episcopalian or whatever, all of these traditions, or most of them anyway, have a peace fellowship. So you could get involved with your peace fellowship and become a member of that as evidence. And most of these peace fellowships trace their origins to supporting conscientious objectors.
Before I became a Quaker, I was raised Irish Catholic, and the Catholics had a real strong peace tradition. That's all I knew when I was growing up, was like the Berrigan brothers, Day and Ammon Hennessy and all that folk, Cesar Chavez. So that was real strong. I didn't have contact with them, but I knew of them in my little farm town. So that was real important, growing up Catholic like that, in terms of seeing there were alternatives.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Right. Any other thoughts or questions on Selective Service?
Yeah, so would there be anything going in front of a draft board that would be disqualifying to your service as a conscientious objector?
Yeah, disqualifying beliefs would be kind of broadly, I mean, I'm going to mention like political beliefs. It's still disqualifying today. And by political, it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I'm a libertarian or I'm a, socialist, or it means that you would have your objection to war would be based on political considerations. So it's also called selective conscientious objection. And there's been movements to try to get this approved for a long time, at least 2 decades now, because very important and effective efforts were undermined on September 11th. The Pentagon was maybe having the push that it needed to acknowledge selective conscientious objection, but then September 11th happened and everything got thrown into disarray. So
Okay, let me just jump in. When she says selective conscientious objection, what she's referring to is objection to a particular war.
Yeah. So a political objection. So basically, I would support this war, but not that war. In religious communities, it's known as just war theory, right? Or the just war tradition. In fact, most religious traditions teach some version of just war, except for the traditional peace churches. Every religious community, the Judeo-Christian tradition is certainly a just war tradition, broad Protestant community. Islam, despite meaning peace, teaches just war. So what most people believe and what most people are raised with is disqualifying under conscientious objection law. Okay, Bill, did you want to say more?
Yes, I did. No, all of that is correct. However, and a lot of people will think about a just war tradition or theory or whatever as it's been taught, and then apply those principles and come to the conclusion that there's no such thing as a just war. And I think that's important to understand. And I think, looking at the traditional historic Catholic just war teaching, I personally haven't seen any war that meets those criteria. So if you believe in theory in the possibility of a justifiable war, but come to the conclusion that in the real world we live in, there's no such thing, you can qualify. Okay, what disqualifies you is if in response to some hypothetical question, you say, well, yeah, I would fight in that war. And the CCCO's old handbook for conscientious objectors describes this really, really well. I love this quote. I've been using it for decades. Some would fight only when Allah commands. Some will fight only when Allah commands and Allah remains silent. Some will fight only in Armageddon, which seems to always lie in the future. Some would fight if there were no nuclear weapons, but there are. Some would fight if certain theoretical criteria could be met, but they can't be. In the meantime, these people may find themselves conscientiously opposed to participation in war in any form and can say so honestly. I've always loved that quote.
Yeah, so that would be disqualifying. And that's true for the military, that's true for selective service law, and that's true for military conscientious objectors today. So, they also say it can't be, a shallow belief. It can't be, just a philosophical belief and not something you would apply to your own life. As Bill mentioned, if it's not, something that we think of as a traditionally religious view, your beliefs still have to hold what they called a place parallel in your heart. The other important thing that Bill sort of alluded to is that people don't have to speak for a hypothetical past or future self, so you can't be disqualified because you think, well, maybe if you were alive in World War II, you might have fought in World War II, or if, if invaders come from space, maybe you'll, join in the global fight against, the space invaders or whatever. You can't be, although people get those questions, they get those questions today, and I'm sure they got them in the draft days too. But people get those questions.
They love to ask. And during our time, my time, we see you, Mike. During my time, they would always ask about Hitler, and of course, and if your response is, "Yeah, I would have fought against Hitler," you disqualify yourself. If, on the other hand, you say, "Well, had I grown up in the 30s, there would have been a whole different set of social and political circumstances. And I don't know. And I also know there were people who were opposed to that war and were COs at that time. I honestly don't know where I would have been in that mix had I grown up back then, but I didn't grow up back then. You know, I grew up now, and I have been shaped by the social and political things that affect our world right now. And this is what I believe now and what my conscience leads me to do. I know Mike had something, yeah.
Yeah, my question is, what if they ask, would you fight if someone attacked your mother?
Right. Yeah. So this is a question. So the current application for conscientious objectors, and I'm just going to say a little bit. So Bill mentioned that working with military conscientious objectors is the bulk of our work today, because that's who's kind of falling under this law right now in the absence of a draft. But also people applying for U.S. citizenship have to take, want to apply for an alternative oath, a nonviolent oath. People applying for U.S. citizenship have to take an oath to bear arms for the country. There are people who can conscientiously object to that as well. So there's that variety of conscientious objectors, and the basic, application is what we just went over. But there's also a couple of more detailed questions. That's sort of a truncated, shrunken down version of the application. But in the full application, there's a question about an appropriate use of force. What do you consider to be an appropriate use of force? And when we're, counseling people in the military who are, or anyone who is filling out a conscientious objector application, we look at kind of two sides of that coin, personal self-defense and national defense. And where do you fall on those things? So no, absolutely. You can, defending yourself against an attacker, defending your mother, defending your children is not war, so to the individual. And that's what's so beautiful about conscientious objection, right? Is it's defined by you and your own conscience. What would you personally do? So if you would fight back, if you would use a gun, if you would use lethal force in a personal defense situation, you absolutely could still qualify. If you think a military should exist and the country has a right to defend itself, what we would encourage and make sure people spoke to, to make sure their application was good and legally sufficient, was what's your role in that fight? How can you, if you're not fighting in that war, how do you feel about that war being made in your name if you support that war? Things like that. So there's certainly a difference, and the law acknowledges a difference between personal defense and war. I often tell people about, it's not the same thing as personal defense, but Muhammad Ali, one of our most famous conscientious objectors in this country, he beat people up for sport and money. And was actually still, legally considered a conscientious objector because he could tell the difference. He has his famous line where he says, in the ring, it's consensual. There's a time limit. It's finite. In war, the objective is to kill, 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 and keep on killing, So that was how he drew the line. And that would be the same situation for, a personal defense kind of scenario.
If I might jump in, it's 8:30. I don't want to discontinue anything here. If folks want to say, that's fine, but I will be recording this and posting this. So if anybody does need to leave, and before you do leave, again, we would love to get the Truth and Recruitment Committee going. We also have an annual teen conference. It's called the Teen Peace Jam. It happens in the spring every year with workshops and all kinds of good things on peace and justice issues and art and social skills and that sort of thing. Because of the pandemic, we had to discontinue it this year and last year. This is sort of our substitute, is offering this. There are many ways to get involved in Plowshare. We have teens, we have a teen now on our board, and we've had teens in the past, and you can also be involved in our committees too. So you don't have to be our age to be active in Plowshare. But yeah, if folks want to continue, that's fine. Just keep going.
Okay. I did want to add one thing to what Maria just said, which is everything she said is absolutely correct. But, okay, if you root your objection to war in a personal commitment to pacifism, Jesus says, turn the other cheek, or, you're talking about what Martin Luther King talked about, the power of love to overcome hate, and if that is your framework, which then causes you to be opposed to participation in war, Then some questions about personal violence might, then defending yourself might be relevant because it's reasonable that you should be consistent.
Definitely, definitely. So what else? What other thoughts or questions do people have? I know on our agenda, we did want to talk a little bit more about military recruitment. I know that has come up a little bit. And then we'd like to return to the CO exercise, the beliefs exercise, and just kind of have a little exchange about that, hear how it felt to answer those questions and anything that either of the interactive workshops as they are exercises as they sort of, came together, how that felt for you.
I'm going to keep this recruitment stuff really brief because it sounds like you all already have some truth in recruitment things going, and that's really good. I want to encourage that to get going again. I would hope folks feel moved to get engaged with that. Recruiters, they're trained salespeople. They are, using, the same kind of skills that any hard salesperson is going to use. That if you're buying a used car, to be suspicious of the salesperson. When you're talking to a military recruiter, people don't have that same level of suspicion, and they should, because if you're signing away potentially years of your life or your life, and recruiters routinely lie, they manipulate, they coerce, they do all sorts of things. And I just wanted to mention two things very quickly. One is on the enlistment agreement, on the back of the first page of the enlistment agreement, it's a list of, the top of the page says, partial list of military regulations that apply to me, or words to that effect. And this paragraph is on that page. Laws and regulations that govern military personnel may change without notice to me. Such changes may affect my status, pay, allowances, benefits, and responsibilities as a member of the armed forces, regardless of the provisions of this enlistment document. And regardless is boldface capital letters, okay? So that's actually on the enlistment agreement. So people need to understand when you're talking to a recruiter, all those promises that are made, you gotta be careful about what it is you're really, hearing and agreeing to. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing, and this is really, really important, almost everybody who enters the military enters through something called the delayed entry program. It's kind of a buy now, pay later program. Recruiters go into schools in October, November, get people signed up to report the following summer. And then in those intervening months, people change their mind. And they go to the recruiter. Just today, I was talking to somebody. The recruiter said, "Oh, there's nothing we can do. You have to go." And it's like, no, that's not true. If you're in the delayed entry program, you are not in the military. You're not under the control of those recruiters, and you don't have to go. And so the one thing more than, if you don't remember anything else from today, what can benefit your friends, if you're talking to friends in your school, is to know that if they've joined the military through the delayed entry program, they don't have to go, even though the recruiter will tell them they do. And if they don't go, nothing bad happens to them at all. I've been doing this work for like 40 years, and I've talked to literally probably hundreds of thousands of people who have not gone in the DEP. Nothing bad's happened to any of them because of it. So that's something really important that folks need to know. And of course, there's much more about recruitment we could talk about, but I think those were two of the most important things.
I honestly think that my dog hears you, Bill, because she's my dog and Bill are good friends. Well, she thinks so. I hope Bill thinks so.
Sure, I like her.
So, also, everyone that's recruited into the military today has to check a box that says they are not a conscientious objector. Most people don't know what that is. Most people that we talk with don't remember checking that box. Some people do. A current conscientious objector that I'm working with, who's with the Church of Latter-day Saints, he remembers, and he remembers filtering that question through his conscience and through his religious teaching and saying, oh no, I can do this. This is fine. This is in line with my values.
Yeah, but most people don't even remember it.
No.
Yeah.
But then years later, and that's part of military law, is that whereas with selective service law, selective service policy, you have to show that there's a pattern of these beliefs throughout your life, that you have had these beliefs, and they didn't just appear when you got your draft notice. But with the military, part of your burden is to prove that you were not a conscientious objector when you enlisted. And those pre-existing beliefs is what they call them. Pre-existing beliefs would be disqualifying.
Matthew, you had your hand up?
Yeah, well, actually, it sounds like that just answered, because it sounded like you checking that box could be used against you, but it sounds like it's not necessarily, because at first I was thinking, wait, do they just not take into account the fact that someone can change their mind?
They absolutely take that exact thing
Okay, cool.
into account. Yeah, and that happened. The Department of Defense has allowed people to apply for discharge once since 1960 in the reserve component, 1962 in the active duty. So it coincided with the draft era, so that the military realized, look, somebody could be drafted and then develop CO beliefs, or they could enlist voluntarily or join voluntarily and then develop CO beliefs. And Mike Heller, but wasn't he the one that went to West Point?
Yes.
So that's what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess he got out. It sounds like he didn't apply
Yeah,
first.
he just quit being in the military, basically.
Yeah.
I
And that
think
happens to people. Oh, I'm sorry. And I think there are.
you had a similar story, didn't you? I think maybe. Okay. Go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say that I think that happens to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who don't know that the option of conscientious objection is available to them once they're in the military. They think, I volunteered for this. I did this myself. How could I possibly qualify? And they may not find us. We're hoping through events like this, that we raise the profile of conscientious objection. Obviously, we want to repeal selective service and abolish any notion of a draft in a free and democratic society. But there still are conscientious objectors today, and that still is an option for people in the military. So if you know anyone who's having doubts about their military service, please make sure they know that this is an option. But people get out other ways, right? Even if they are a conscientious objector, maybe the conflict with their conscience is so deep that it's affecting their mental health. So a lot of people get out on behavioral health or mental health issues, a medical discharge or an administrative discharge based on mental health. The thousands and thousands of people that go AWOL every year, many of them have done so for reasons of conscience, or they just put their heads down, suppress their beliefs, soldier on literally, and get out when their time is up and they don't re-enlist. That happens too. As many people probably know, there's only about 1% of the population that joins the military. 40% of the current military comes from 7 states. The biggest reason people join the military in this all recruited / all volunteer force is because their family members have a history of military service. So, we want to think that there's broad, widespread support for militarism and war, but there really isn't. We're manipulated. We're emotionally manipulated. Most people have made the choice, and the choice is they do not want to fight. They do not want to kill.
It's a lot of poor kids too. When I was living in New York City, I'd pass through the Jamaica Avenue subway station, and the recruiters would be standing there, and they would say to the kids, "You want a job?" That was the exact line they would use. Matt, you had your hand up again.
Sorry about that. No, I just forgot to lower it. My bad.
Okay. Yeah. No, but Gary, that I think is the other major reason why people join. Yeah.
Opportunity, financial opportunity. Well, we'll see. It's really interesting to watch now as the economy rebounds, what's going to happen with recruiting the military's on their goals so far for this year for recruiting. It's also, kind of a kick in the belly when you think about like, Generation Z is like, there's so many beautiful things that Generation Z is bringing us, that we older generations did fight for, but like, we didn't quite get there. We didn't have the critical mass that we needed. And so there's always hope, right, for the next generation. And I love watching, Generation Z, you guys. But darn it, they're joining. You're still joining the military in numbers that the military is okay with, so they're not admitting that they have a deficit yet in recruiting. So fingers crossed.
Hi, folks. Jeff Klinger here again. I'm going to have to leave as well, but I wanted to make 2 points before I sign off. The first one is a quiz for anybody on the panel. Does the abbreviation RE4 ring any bells?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay, well, for those who don't know it, so I indicated in the chat box that I was 1AO and I spent 2 years in the Army Medical Department. On the day that I was to be separated, there was lots of paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. First of all, they gave me a good conduct medal because I was a good person. And next of all, the person who was executing the document said, do you realize what this says, RE4? I said, no, I never heard of it. RE4 is a re-enlistment code that at that time was applicable to COs, homosexuals, drug addicts, or convicted felons. And I said, well, it's very interesting, but it meant that you could not, quote, re-enlist. And it was one of those non sequiturs. Anyway, so people know about that. The last one is simply addressed to the young people who are still on the call or who participated in the meeting. The work that you're doing, the questions that you're struggling with and coming to some kind of conclusions on may well turn out to be the most important thing that you'll do in your entire life. I wish you all the best, and know that anybody that's on this call is happy to chat. There are no stupid questions except the ones that are not answered. There's a ton of literature to look at. There are a ton of heroes to learn about and to follow. You're doing great work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. That was good. Yeah, that RE thing he's talking about, that's a re-enlistment code. Every discharge paper has one. The number is either 1, 2, 3, or 4. And 1 means they'll be happy to take you back, no questions asked. 4 means you can't come back into the military no matter what. And then 2 and 3, maybe you can get in if you jump through some hoops and get some waivers. But yeah, it's given to folks that the military doesn't want to have anymore. Yeah. Although the homosexuality thing's probably changed now because they had the don't ask, don't tell for a while, and now they've eliminated that. So, gays are allowed to have full inclusion. They've even had marriages on board, battleships. So gay marriages, yeah.
And no, you're not a conscientious objector if you oppose serving with LGBTQ people. We get those calls. Yeah. Unfortunately. Yep. I'm wondering if people have reactions to the CO exercise. You might think that, maybe somebody who has a lot of experience writing, maybe an academic, an officer who has a degree or an advanced degree may sail through the essay questions of the CO application pretty easily. But I want to say that the people who write from their heart and speak from their heart have the easiest time at answering those questions. And I'm just wondering, how were those questions for you? How did you guys find those questions? Had you considered these issues before? Was it easy? Did it come easy? Was it a struggle? What did you think about answering the CO application questions? some of them.
I can remember filling out the form and really struggling with it, but then I just wrote what I believed, basically. And I wasn't a polished writer or anything like that. I just wrote what I believed and sent it in. And I guess it worked because, like I said, they just gave it to me, without me meeting with the board or anything.
That's very rare. Oh, and it couldn't happen today. Okay, under current regulations, conscientious objectors must have a draft board hearing, and if they don't show up, the draft board will rule that they've abandoned their CO claim.
Yeah, that's the only time I've ever heard of it. Not even going for a hearing and getting it. Starting an angel, I guess.
Wow, it happens. So military COs have a hearing as well. So imagine you're an enlisted member or even an officer, and you've got to write out these questions, a little more detailed than these questions. And then you've got to defend your beliefs to a bunch of officers, higher ranking officers than you, who don't agree with you, and, think a range of things from, you're screw up to you're a liar to you're a coward, all kinds of things. It's an incredibly courageous act. It's an incredibly courageous step. This particular past summer, when a lot of people were locked down and things were quiet in a lot of people's lives, we were breathless answering the phone over the summer during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, when the National Guard and the military, the active duty military in different cases were being mobilized to suppress dissent, to suppress the protests in support of Black lives. George Floyd's murder and the way the other officers turned their backs crystallized a lot of people's beliefs for them. So we were incredibly busy. We worked with a lot of conscientious objectors this summer who were moved by those events.
And we're still getting some of those calls.
Yeah. So we're going to be posting an interview. Conscientious Objectors Day is May 15th, International Conscientious Objectors Day. And we're going to start a series of interviews with conscientious objectors, with present day conscientious objectors. And the first one we're going to post on CO Day next Saturday, a week from tomorrow. And that's going to be with a warrant officer, an intelligence officer whose beliefs crystallized after George Floyd's murder. So stay tuned for that. Check out our website. I want to hear from you guys in the last 9 minutes we have together.
Yeah, I mean, it was super. I enjoyed writing out my ideas. I think it's easier because it's your own story as a person. It is nice to reflect on, where I got a lot of my values from my parents, my family, school, even some books, media that you read can really open your eyes to things and make you think. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a fun exercise to do. I think a lot of it, personally where I come from, my family's never been religious, so it's not from a religious place. It's more of just wanting to create the most good in the world that you can do, that you can make. And I don't think, and then that's like a whole debate of is it even possible for a war to do that? I think I will say, you think about World War II and it's like, okay, yeah, maybe. But some of these other ones, it's just, seems ridiculous.
Sometimes a client will ask me, how did I get into this? Why do I do this? And I love thinking about what shaped me.
What did shape you? What got you into, being so involved in this?
I think I'm a radical because I come from good Italian immigrant socialist stock. So just knowing the experiences of my grandparents, who were immigrants to this country and they were radicalized. I love, I don't know if anybody knows the stories of Sacco and Vanzetti, but they say that the poor don't live in America, they live under America. And that, that's what I learned from my immigrant grandparents and my parents, who grew up with them, and the life that they experienced until Italians became white. And but I never forgot that, so it radicalized me from a very young age. But I wanted to stop the war in Iraq, like single-handedly. Like, so Gary, I was your counterpart in Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. So I was working there, and I thought I could stop the war. I thought I could. I thought we could, and when we didn't, I was, of course, devastated and angry and heartbroken, and so I said, well, if I can't stop a war, let me try to stop people from going. So I started a counter recruiting program in the schools in New Mexico, and then we started a hotline, a GI rights hotline, and Bill came out and trained us. And then I said, okay, well, if I can't stop people from going in, because New Mexico is a military colony, and so we got fought a lot getting into the schools and talking to young people and stuff. So I thought, well, if I can't keep people from joining, then I'm going to help them get out. So that's how I came here.
I come from Irish Catholic and German farmers in Northern Illinois, and Vietnam was it for me, because it was poor white and black and brown kids who went over, and they started coming back, and I started hearing horrendous things, and just all the stuff, my dad had to deliver a telegram to a cousin of his that his son had been killed over there. It really opened your eyes to what the world was what was happening in the world. And it's never been the same for me since. So it was Vietnam. I think the same for you, Bill.
Well, for me, my family was German. My dad was in World War II, U.S. World War II. The family moved here in the 1800s. But I was raised with good values, but I was very active in the church. Was planning to be a minister, but they were still kind of abstract values. But the college I went to was had a quarter of the body was from overseas. And only 2 students were from Europe. And so my best friends were from Vietnam, Japan, Santo Domingo, Cuba. My roommate one year was from Nigeria. And so getting to know all of these people with all these different perspectives, I really came to think of myself as a citizen of the world, not of any particular country. And that's what really did it for me. My generic Christian values that came face to face with the world, really.
Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. Shall we wrap it up?
Could I speak real quick? I'm sorry, I'll make it quick.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing for the people who go into the military. And I've heard the recruiters, and they say that we're going to shape you into these great, wonderful adults, because they go in as 18-year-olds, and I work with kids. Oh my goodness, I can't believe they are allowed to make this decision. And they're being shaped into these adults, and then the military doesn't like what they get. They get this person who has a wonderful mind and who has developed in their heart and in their thought. So I love that you guys are a resource for them. So thank you.
I want to thank you, Bill, for doing the program, and thank you, Zan Witt, who's a member of our board and of the program committee, and he organized this whole program for us. And we can do it again. This has been very rich. We'll be posting this on our Facebook pages and groups, and I'll email out the link to folks. And check out Center on Conscience and more. You guys are doing great work.
Thank you so much. You guys
Bye.
too. Keep it up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. You've been a very good host.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for organizing this.
Right.
Thank you, Zan. Take care, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care.